Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this long-running program continues to provide legal information, relevant examples, and practical assistance to help you with law matters. A better understanding of the law puts you in a better place to protect yourself, your family, and at times your business. As we present various topics, you may decide to handle some issues yourself. We're here to help you do that, in fact. If you do decide to enlist outside counsel, professional counsel, you'll be better prepared, and our hope is also to help you save time, money, and achieve the best possible results. As always, we want to welcome and thank once again Attorney David Bazar from the Bazar and Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to weigh in on the various topics that we tackle each session. So today, the governance of nonprofits. What do you need to know about the differences in governance between nonprofits and for-profit organizations, from startup to closure? What about the officers of a nonprofit organization, the members? What about the structure? What do you need to know about the tax situation? Whether you're starting a for-profit business or a nonprofit, it's always time-consuming and it takes a lot of energy. Many of them start up the same way, but nonprofits might be something worthwhile, might be something that works for you. It certainly has some benefits for its tax-exempt status from the IRS if it qualifies, but there are differences. So, David, let's get right to it. What are the differences between a for-profit organization, company, and a nonprofit organization?
Well, there's a couple of things, the most important of which is a corporation that's for profit has owners, and if it's under a corporate structure, the stockholders own the corporation, and therefore the owners control who runs the corporation, which means that they pick the directors, and then the directors pick the officers, and the officers run the company at the direction of the directors, who are picked at the whim or will of the owners. In a nonprofit, there are no real owners because there's no profit to pass through to anybody. So there's usually a board of directors who hires an executive director, or if it's a school, a head of school, or if it's a hospital, the chairman or CEO of the hospital who's going to run it. And the only employee of that board is the executive director or the head of school, and then they hire the people who work for them.
And when someone's thinking about, mine's a nonprofit because I have this structure, it's more than structure. Let's talk a little bit about the differences in how they exist, their purposes and their management and their, well, I guess taxation at some point, but how they are run. Even their culture is different. Let's explore that.
So a for-profit business is run for the purpose of making money. And whatever you're doing, the mission of the business, the end result is you want to make sure your mission accomplishes making money, because that's why you've started this business in the first place. The mission of a nonprofit really can be many different things, but it's to strive to do good overall in some area, whether it's education or medicine or helping the homeless or whatever the purpose of your nonprofit is. And so the structure is both different because of the legal structure of these different entities, as well as you said, the the taxation and the requirements of what you have to do to report your income.
So if you think about a nonprofit existing for some societal good or to serve some human need, some profit businesses do that too.
Well, sometimes they're hand in hand with, we want to make money, but we also, our mission is to help improve the world. I think of, I can't remember the name of the company, but they might want to sell socks, and make money selling socks, but maybe for every sock or two that they sell, they give one away.
So some are called social enterprises. Some have the corporate shield, but have some percentage of their business profits going to some organization. That doesn't make them a nonprofit organization or a nonprofit company, correct?
That's correct. What they donate for charity may be a deduction from their profits, from their reportable income, but it's not a designation of what might be a 501c3 or other nonprofit where money donated to the nonprofit by a person or individual is deductible. They're still perhaps a company that has a conscience and wants to do good, but they're still designed to make money.
Do both the for-profit and the nonprofit entities start out as corporations and then decide my money is going to go instead to reinvestment to promote more programs and therefore be nonprofit, as opposed to our money is going into the shareholders' pocketbooks?
Yeah. When the entity is formed, the decision is made. And there are certain rules that you have to follow once you make that decision. So if you create a for-profit business, it doesn't necessarily have to be a corporation. It could be an LLC or a partnership or a sole proprietorship. But you have certain rules that you have to follow. There are certain rules for the stockholders and protections for stockholders that exist. And the corporate or governance of the business is sort of set by statute, although if it's an LLC or a partnership, there's some flexibility in how you set up the structure to govern the entity. But that is decided and determined based on what is filed when the entity is created.
And when someone is starting a nonprofit organization or a for-profit business, how might their funding at the outset change or be different?
So a for-profit business is generally funded by capital that's invested in the company. And if it's a structure that's growing and there's offerings of stock, there's perhaps a stock offering that follows very specific rules that can be governed by the SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, or otherwise, so that people who are investing in the business are protected. Of course, there are a lot of startup venture capital places where you can get money, or Kickstarter funds and things of that nature. But those are all designed for people to invest in a business that is designed to make a profit, so that their investment returns a profit to them. The nonprofit world is totally different, and there may be grants that a company or a nonprofit may apply for. There may be donations that can be requested if they're set up properly so that those donations can be tax deductible to the donor. They can set up a business model that makes money, that money is made by selling a product of some type or a service. A school is the example I gave before. Dues can be charged for the type of organization, that all depending on what it is and what it's designed to do. The difference is a not-for-profit can make a profit that's not taxed, but it's not designed to make money for an owner.
What you said matters very much to those who are starting organizations, who talk to us about how are we going to start. We can't make money, we can't make a profit. Yes, you can make a profit. It is specifically what you're doing with that and how it gets reported. So how does that happen, David?
Yeah, so if the organization is making money, the profit doesn't go to the members or the theoretical owners, because there are none. It goes back into the organization, and the organization can use that money to increase the type of services it provides, or to use in making the services they provide better. So it's designed for the money to go back into the organization, not to owners, because there are no owners.
So when someone is starting either one, corporation. Incorporation papers, you mentioned C or LLC or S. When someone's starting a nonprofit business organization, they too have to follow certain rules and regulations. Papers, let's address the papers. Let's address the bylaw situation. How are they the same? How are they different?
So they're different in that you file different type of paperwork with the Secretary of State's office when you're setting up your nonprofit than you would do setting up a corporation or an LLC or that type of thing. There are still, in general, articles of incorporation, bylaws that are used for a nonprofit, which would set up who are going to be the people running the nonprofit. What's the structure of that? Is there a board of directors? Are there officers? What role do the officers play? What are the rules if you were to close your nonprofit, which is actually governed by the Attorney General's office? You have to work with them to determine if there's any assets left, where they're going to go. They don't go back necessarily at all to the members. They go to another charitable organization of a similar stripe. And so those are the types of papers that you would file, very similar to the paperwork that a for-profit company might be setting up when they're set up. The difference is also, besides the actual paperwork, what you have to file with the IRS. And there are different types of nonprofit organizations, and I'm not an accountant. I don't venture to guess exactly what those are between 501(c)s and other nonprofits, but you have to file the correct designation with the IRS and get approved to be a nonprofit.
So when someone's starting out, as we say, we try to provide resources for our viewers if they needed to pursue it. Yes, you can incorporate a business. Yes, you can offer guidance. Yes, you are suggesting someone may need to check in with an accountant. But at each state, the Secretary of State's office usually has a business regulation department that's for profit, certainly, but also there is usually some designation that says if you're running or trying to develop a nonprofit, here are some of your regulations that you need to follow. And at the AG's office, is it the AG's website where you'd find how to close a business if you were how to close an organization if you were a nonprofit?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's you would see on the Secretary of State's website sort of almost like a checklist of all the things you need to do. You're starting a business, you're starting a nonprofit, if that's on there as well. I don't know if there's anything like that on the Attorney General's website, but there will be a section that says the Attorney General's office, nonprofit or charitable section, and you could always click through and find out who you could call if you needed information.
So you have to file with the state if you're starting a business and incorporating a business. I read somewhere that it actually costs more to file the papers for a nonprofit. Is that possible?
It's possible. I'm not sure about that.
And it varies state to state. I guess we need to say that as well. When someone has started a for-profit business and seems to be doing well, but then they decide that they might have some interest in pursuing the social side of it more, the environmental impact, the something that is educational or policy-driven. Can a for-profit business then start a nonprofit component within its, not through its business structure, but within its organization, and how does that happen?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how the tax structure of that would work, but I certainly am aware of for-profit businesses that have within that corporate structure a division that might be focusing on the environment, or a division that might be focusing on other social issues of the day that they want to either fix, improve, or work on. I just can't tell you that they could do that within the organization in terms of the tax structure.
They might need to set up a separate and more of a
Yeah, oftentimes you'll find that one structure that's for profit might spin off perhaps a foundation or a nonprofit that they can donate money to or help fund or whatever, that would be allowed to accept donations as a nonprofit, because it's not whatever that money that's being generated by that foundation or nonprofit is going to the social work that they are trying to help and fund, and it's not going back to the profits of the stockholders of the original corporation.
How are nonprofits monitored or regulated?
So just like any other organization, there's a couple of things. So one of the things that people ask me sometimes as an attorney, I need some legal advice. I've been asked to join a board of a different organization. What are my responsibilities and what should I know? And so one of the first things I tell them is to make sure that the organization they're looking to join, look at the mission and make sure it's something that you're aligned with. Make sure it's something that you want to support and that you understand what they're trying to accomplish. The second thing I actually say from a practical point of view is ask them if they have directors, officers and directors insurance or other insurance that will protect you if the board does something that other people think is not appropriate, so that you're not at risk. Because when you join a board of a nonprofit, you have a fiduciary responsibility. And you can eventually, if there's a breach of that by the board or you as an individual, you can be held accountable for that. So that's one way that these organizations might be regulated, by lawsuits. You don't want to get there, so and if you are working on a group that you really are aligned with, just make sure there's some protection.
So there is the directors and officers insurance. There's also general liability insurance, right, that each may have to pursue, and we're not here to talk about the details of that. I don't think either of us is prepared for that, but there's an issue about indemnification. And would you suggest to your client who's asking, David, should I ask for a copy of their bylaws, which aren't necessarily posted? Should I ask for their 990s? How do you prepare someone so that they are feeling that there's less risk?
Yeah, well, all of those things are actually good ideas. You just need to really know the organization that you're looking to help or join. 990s, as you know, are filings that you can get online and take a look at what they're reporting, and you can ask for the bylaws. You could also ask this question: if I join your board, is there an orientation? And what would I expect at the orientation? And what you really want to hear is many organizations I'm involved with give a new board member a pretty extensive orientation where they get a notebook that has the articles of incorporation, it has the bylaws, it has the other members of the board listed, because you probably should know who else is on the board. Are these people that I think I can work with? Am I concerned about anything? And so the more information you can get, the better off you are. Many really good nonprofits will have a mission with a mission statement and bullet points as to goals and how they're going to attempt to do that. What is their structure on the board of a nonprofit? Do they have different subcommittees? Is there a finance subcommittee? Is there a buildings and grounds subcommittee, if that's appropriate? Is there a diversity subcommittee? You ought to ask about that and what is expected of you as a new board member. Are you expected to be on the board and just go to 2, 3, 6 board meetings a year, or are you expected to be on subcommittees and contributing in that way as well?
I think it's probably worthwhile to mention. So often nonprofits will say, come on over, I'll give you a tour. Yes, here's the board packet if you're going to be joining us. Here's a list of the board members, as you said. Sometimes their bios are there so that you get an idea of what the full complement looks like. You could check, I guess, yourself to see if there's diversity, and I don't mean just to check off boxes such as black, white, green, pink, and every other possible box that they could list, but just to know that there is a cross-section that will be best suited to handling the nonprofit that you want to work with. is it legal, required, or even necessary for whoever is inviting you to join the board to say, we expect that everyone who joins the board to participate financially, not necessarily assessing you or levying you an amount, but for our grants, for example, we need to have 100% participation of our board members in giving some donation.
Oftentimes, it's not required, but oftentimes expected and should be discussed up front that if you're joining a board, assuming that it's one that you donated to in the past or not, it would be reasonable for the person asking you to say, we hope that this would be one of your top philanthropic priorities. We're not, many times when you're asked to be on a board, they're not asking you to give a specific amount, although some may, but they would just make sure that this is one of your top priorities. So if you're going to join the board, be prepared to make sure that that board is one of your top philanthropic priorities, so that not everybody has the same capacity, but you should be expected, perhaps, if you join, to give to the best of your capacity.
Well stated. What about payments for boards of directors for profit organizations? They might be paid to go to a meeting.
Yeah.
How does that work on the nonprofit level?
So most nonprofits that I'm familiar with do not pay anything for people to be on the board. In fact, most of them, you pay them for the honor of being on the board because you want to support the organization. Mm-hmm. As you said, for-profit big companies pay very well for their board members to be on the board and pay for their expenses to go to the meetings and that type of thing. I've heard of some nonprofits paying for board members to go on retreats or other things and pay the expenses of those things, but for the most part, I would expect most nonprofits to have you pay your expenses.
So what about the idea that nonprofits have missions, goals, and to that end, they may want to do some sort of advocacy? Address advocacy versus PACs. How involved, to what extent can nonprofit organizations get involved with supporting what might be a political cause versus a political candidate?
Well, there are totally different types of things. So, and it depends on the type of nonprofit. So, for example, the Rhode Island Bar Association is a membership required institution for lawyers to practice in Rhode Island. And since it's not a voluntary bar, but a mandatory bar, the Rhode Island Bar Association cannot take political stances on issues or legislation or any of those types of things. They can only take a position on legislation that's germane to the practice of law. Other nonprofits that are not required membership, but rather voluntary, really can take a position on most anything and support most anything except politics in a very specific area with a very specific organization that allows for that. So while you can advocate and take positions, you have to understand the rules of political donations to know whether your nonprofit can donate to a campaign or not.
Where would someone find that information, David?
I would start with the Board of Elections and go from there. Okay.
Conflicts of interest. So when someone works for a company, we know what some conflicts of interest might be. How might that play out on a nonprofit board? So the executive director has 3 children and they all need full-time or part-time jobs. Conflict, not a conflict?
Well, it depends on the situation. And is nepotism a conflict of interest? Is it something that this organization allows? Does the board allow it? That the rules are sort of like this, as I understand it. You join an organization as a director, many will have you sign a conflict of interest form.
Every year.
Every year. And does that mean that you can't do things, business-wise with the group? So let's just make believe that you're on a board that has a building and you are a contractor and you want to do work on the building. Can you bid on it? Can you do the work? I think you can. I just don't think you can be on the committee or the group or whoever might vote on who's getting hired, and you'd have to recuse yourself from that. So there are some things that as a board member you may have to recuse yourself from, but it doesn't mean there's an absolute bar to being able to do certain things.
So for people who are interested in learning more about that, there is a website called Board Source, BOARD Source, that will provide some guidance on even how various organizations might develop a conflict of interest policy, something about disclosure, and as you said, recusing yourself from voting on certain issues.
It would really be a good source if it has best practices. These are the best practices your organization can use in these types of situations. And as I was telling you about the orientation, one of the things besides getting all the information is we often did case studies in different boards I was on and say, here's a case study. This is what the issue is that's presented hypothetically to you as a board member. How do you deal with it? And so we would draw on real case studies that the board had to deal with. And oftentimes the answer was, oh, you need to speak to the executive director or the head of school or whatever in dealing with whatever was brought to you as a board member.
Good to know. One other thing relative to advocacy. So can a nonprofit organization lobby? Let's not use the Bar Association because you can also be involved with legislation
Right.
and the rest.
Yeah.
So can you lobby?
You can, depending again on the organization and the rules of the organization, yes, oftentimes you see that and you hear about it all the time. This particular nonprofit lobbies all the time or has a political action committee or PAC, as you said, that donates money. So depending on the organization, as long as it's a voluntary organization and not a mandatory membership for a certain group of people, there's probably a lot of room for them to do things like that.
Good. One other thing I think we didn't touch on, you addressed at the top of the segment who is serving on boards. How do you uninvite someone to serve on a board? How do you remove someone who's in service on a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit where we can say, we no longer need your services, you're fired?
Generally,
But on the board,
there's bylaws, and in the bylaws will be certain things that you can do to be removed and what the removal process is. It might require a vote, it might be a majority or 3/4. Some organizations have a rule that you can be removed if they have 9 meetings a year and you don't go to 8 of them. So there's many different ways and rules that you can have, but it usually has to be written into your bylaws or other rules of your organization.
Thank you. I think it also means, too, there's an opportunity for, under those bylaws, to list how long some members can serve, what the length of the term is, and how many terms before they rotate off the board, and so on.
Many organizations will have that written right in. You can be on for 2 terms of whatever number of years. Maybe there's an exception to that if you're a presidential appointment, or that type of thing.
Good to know. We hope that this has been helpful to you in thinking about your nonprofit organization, startup, continuance, or closure. We thank you for tuning into The Law Matters. We hope you'll tune in again. As we say, the law matters to you.